How can we make the world better? By making ourselves better. The Dr. Joe Show explores how you can make positive personal change by using his groundbreaking and highly effective I Am approach to understand who we are and why we do what we do. Your small changes can have big effects.
Join us now for the Dr. Joe Show with Mark Stiles of Stiles Law, Thomas McCoy, and your host, Dr. Joe Schrand.
Welcome to the Dr. Joe Show.
Mark, wow! I don't think I've heard that that inflection before.
Well, you know, Dr. Joe, I am clearing through a cold. Remember the common cold?
Yeah.
Well, I went through that last week, so there's still a little of that cold floating around in my throat, if you will.
Well, I don't want to edit that out because I really appreciate the way you brought that up.
Should we do it again? Should we do it again?
No, absolutely not. We're not doing it again. We are sticking with that and
authentic. The authentic frog in my throat.
Yeah. It does make me think of the guy who discovered penicillin, though. That was Fleming. So how have you been doing? I hope your cold is a little bit better.
Yeah, I did totally through it, but you know, it's one of those things. It just kind of lingers. It feels like, but I feel fine. I feel great actually, compared to a few days ago where I didn't feel as great.
I'm glad you're doing better. You know, and you're able to bring up all this stuff.
But
very real way.
But it is an interesting phenomenon how the common cold is so very different now than it was 3 short years ago.
It's very
and how you react to it and how you behave as a cold holder, right? You're much more aware of others now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Common cold.
And pretty much everyone, you know, if they get a cold, they do a COVID test at home and be sure that they're not positive, which can be negative. It's more positive when you're negative.
Oh boy, here we go.
No, but isn't that the weirdest thing? And what's changed in our world that when you're negative, that's positive, and when you're positive, that's negative. I don't understand. Anyway, Tom, how have you been doing?
Doing pretty good, Dr. Joe. I mentioned last week that I've been reading through the Dune novels, and man, I've never read these many novels consecutively in a row, because sometimes they'll just have nonfiction, fiction, just kind of like sandwich it. But I've just been so hooked reading the first prequels about the Butlerian Jihad, which, if you're a fan of Dune, that's the dark, very dark era that, man, 3 books of like 600 pages, it'll put you in a bad mood. But by the end of this year, I will finish the Dune series, which the chronology of it, Frank Herbert died before he could finish the story, but his son completed it. So before the year's out, I will have finished the entire Dune saga and will know how it ended. And just to have to walk away from that, I don't know. I don't know if I'm emotionally prepared from it.
Yeah, it's going to be something. It sounds like you're really married to these books.
Yeah, it's a deep connection.
Yeah, which is very different than what our author is going to be talking about. Almost the opposite. So with that in mind, Tom, could you introduce our guest for tonight?
Absolutely, Dr. Joe. Tonight we have Dawn Dais. Dawn Dais is a freelance writer and designer. Her previous books, including The Shit No One Tells You, The Shit No One Tells You About Pregnancy, The Shit No One Tells You About Toddlers, This Shit No One Tells You About Baby Number 2, and The Non-Runner's Marathon Guide for Women, were published by Seal Press, have topped Amazon.com bestseller lists, and have been featured by countless TV and print media sources. Her uniquely sarcastic yet inspiring tone has entertained and guided an enthusiastic core of readers towards their various ridiculous parenting and athletic goals. Dawn's most recent book, The Shit No One Tells You About Divorce, will be released in 2023. Welcome to the Dr. Joe Show.
Yeah, welcome. This is so much fun because I know the audience on WATD has just heard beep. No one tells you about beep. It's great. It's great. Dawn, welcome. Nice to have you here.
And thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure.
That was a lot of profanity. My parents are so proud.
Yeah, it's so true, and I'm glad we got that all out. So, Sorry. I'll keep it together. So tell us about yourself. Welcome to the Dr. Joe Show. Who are you, Dawn?
Who am I? Well, for the purposes of our conversation, I am a author. I've written a bunch of different books, as you mentioned. I started writing probably about 15 years ago, and my first book was about training for a marathon if you are a lazy person. And then I did one about cycling, and then I had kids. And then I thought there's something that's funny to write about. And so I wrote my first book. Can I say
Yeah,
it?
just
They're going to just beep it.
Absolutely.
I remember I had my kid, and I just had this title like swirling around in my head. The no one tells you. My first book was called The Non-Runners Marathon Training Guide for Women. That was not my title. It was a title they came up with at the publisher. I think they wanted like every searchable term in the world in the title. And they changed my original title. And so I was like, I don't know much about what this book is going to be, but I know this is going to be the title, and it's going to do really well because it's just the thought that goes to your head when you have your first baby. Like there's so much stuff no one told me. And so that book did really well and connected with new moms really well. So I just kept writing in that genre. And then fast forward and I got a divorce. And so I thought I would write about divorce. Decidedly less entertaining than babies, but yeah, so that book is out and here we are. That brings us to present day.
Well, let's hear about the book. Although I will tell you before we hear about what my mother said, because my mother got divorced and she used to say she was a divorcee, but always wanted to be a widow. So it was the Frances Strand. It was her line. So
yeah.
Tell us about the book.
It's different than anything I've ever written. I've written mostly kind of nonfiction humor. My books have always had a lot of heart in them because, they're about subjects like taking on big challenges, whether that be training for a marathon or raising tiny humans. But ultimately, I've always kind of tried to find the humor and the ridiculousness of those situations. And taking on divorce was just a different beast. I wrote it not that long after my divorce, so I was very conscious of the fact that I was writing in permanent ink. And during a time when I probably shouldn't have been, I was very aware that like you write and that it doesn't come out for a year and then it sits on bookshelves for years and years and years and years. My first book, it just got reissued. I think it's been 10 years. And I was reading it again and it's cool because it's like a little time capsule. But some of the parts of it, I'm like, oh, that's kind of harsh because I wrote it when I was still kind of in the thick of babies. So I'm very aware that can happen. And so I try to be conscious of that while writing this book because it's not just my story really, it's other people's story. And so it's one thing to bear your own soul, but when that story touches other people and other people are part of that story and those people are still in your life, you have to be really conscious of that. So there was a lot of editing and writing and editing and cutting and cutting and cutting. And my editor sending me stuff back with like, this is great. And we can't use any of it. So glad you got that out. So yeah, it was very therapeutic, but then I kind of, it's sort of all over the map, which is sort of how divorce is. It's got some chapters that are really funny. It's got some chapters that are really sad. It's got some chapters that have, pretty much all the chapters have a lot of profanity in them, more than I've ever had in any book. But it just felt like it's written for people in a certain time in their life when profanity seems very appropriate. So that's kind of the book,
I mean, there's harsh, but there's also honest.
Yeah. And I think, I read it now and I'm like, because I'm so far beyond who I even was a year ago when I wrote it. But I said that I wrote it for people who are in their meantime. In the meantime of divorce, for me, was like I had these friends who were a couple years ahead of me on their divorce timelines, and they would always be like, you're going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And this is during the chaos of the explosion of my life. And I knew logically, I'm not stupid. I knew it was going to be fine. But I would kept saying to them, like, yeah, okay, that's awesome. But like, what do I do in the meantime? Like that time between things blowing up and things settling into a new normal and not feeling like it's new, it's just normal, and so it's written for those people who are in that kind of chaotic explosion time as sort of a, I've been there and keep going, and it's gonna get better, I promise you. But also, like, it's crappy right now, and I acknowledge that, and you should acknowledge it, and it's okay. It's okay if it's crappy. It's supposed to be. It's gonna be, and then it's gonna be okay.
Yeah. I suppose if it wasn't crappy, that might even be worse in some ways,
I think sometimes people, and I did this to a certain extent too, you do a lot of numbing and a lot of sidestepping and a lot of keeping yourself busy. And a lot of people get into relationships real quick, and they're just looking for another person to sort of band-aid their broken parts. And what you really have to do is just actually do the work to figure out what happened, how can you do better in the future, own your part in it, and figure out just how you can be better, and then get to a place of grace for yourself and your ex, especially if you're co-parenting.
Mm. But it sounds like the sequence of books is really talking about your life and how things have gone from one place to the other. What's that been like for you to share that with the world? It's
been interesting. It's fun in that, like, I can read these books that I wrote, and they are all time capsules, and it's intimidating to write books that are about your life, about your heart, and special and specific circumstances. But then it's actually really cool to look back and see, this is who I was 15 years ago. This is who I was 10 years ago. This is who I was when my kids were babies. This is who I was when I was going through my divorce. It's vulnerable, but it's actually really, it's, I don't know many people, I mean, I guess you have your journals, right? It's kind of the same thing as reading a journal, although this isn't, I did a lot of editing. I probably would, it would be in a journal, but it's, you just get to see different versions of yourself. And that's pretty cool, and an evolution of who you are and who you wanted to be and who you became. And it's kind of fun. I think for my kids, it might be fun someday to read and see who their mom was at different periods in her life. And I was super conscious of that when writing this book. My kids are going to read this someday. Maybe. I don't know if they'll care, but I would care if my mom wrote a book and I could read it in 20 years, it'd be interesting. So for them, I think it could be interesting too, to see who I was and who I became and all that.
Talking about divorce, but Tom, off air, you had a comment as well.
Well, yeah. So I haven't been divorced yet, but I have also never run a marathon yet. But I also hate running because it is quite painful. I'm still, I've lost a lot of weight over the years, but I am still quite heavy and quite tall. So I was thinking, like, I can walk pretty fast. Is there precedent of walking marathons?
I don't know. I think for me, marathon training, it had nothing to do with the physical aspect of it. I did it when I was so young. I was just a baby. I think I was like 25. But what I got out of training for a marathon helped me for the rest of my life, because it's just about setting a goal for yourself and then backing out to mile one and figuring out how to get to mile, like you said, I could walk a marathon. Yeah, you could probably today. It probably would hurt quite a bit. There's a training aspect that's where you're going to get the value of marathon training, is finding a training plan and then being like, I'm going to walk 5 miles today, and then 7 miles in a week, and then 11, and then 13. It's the training.
I walk 15 miles. I'll take 15-mile walks like every other night, sometimes when I have a night free. Yeah.
Well, there you go. And then there's something about what it requires of your brain to just be with itself for 15 miles. For me, it was almost meditative, because it got me into a state of, I mean, it was also, there's a pain aspect that I was having to like push through, just my general dislike for movement of any sort, especially running. But yeah, it shifts your brain a little bit, the ability to concentrate and be with your own thoughts for 15, 20, 25 miles. I don't know. I think it's definitely doable, and there's value in it too.
And just knowing that, at the end of the day, you'll be in your own bed.
That was what I always, running was just always I called it running in circles, because wherever I started, I always ended there. And I was like, I never even gotten anywhere. Like, I just ran 16 miles. I'm back in my damn car. Like every once in a while there was a race that started someplace and ended someplace. Those were good. There was one that started at one Mexican restaurant and ended at another Mexican restaurant. That was my favorite. The chips and salsa at the end. I'm like, this is what we need for me to be excited about this sport. But yeah, I mean, moving your body is never a bad idea.
Yeah. You said that the training has stuck with you and you've learned something from it. What have you retained from that?
I was so young when I did it, and I've always been a real big dreamer. And up until that point, I wasn't a big follow througher. So I would have really big dreams and then get really bored, like I'd start, yay, and then be like, oh, this is boring, and then quit. And with the training, it was a fundraiser. And so people like sponsored me or whatever. And so I felt obligated to actually finish doing the thing. And it was in memory of my grandfather who passed away. And so it was for the Stroke Association, and he could have never done anything like that physically, so it was like in his honor. There's all these reasons I put in place why I couldn't quit. So I didn't, and it just taught me about tackling really big goals. And it wasn't long after that I wrote my first book, because how do you write a book? I always wanted to write a book, right? Everybody wants to write a book. What do you have to do for that? For nonfiction, you have to write a book proposal. So I wrote a book proposal, then I found an agent, and then we rewrote the book proposal. Like, you find these big goals and you back out to mile one and figure out the steps you need to take to get to those big goals, and then just do them. And they're not going to be fun. You're going to get bored, but just keep pushing. And so over and over and over again in my life, I was able to apply that strategy. And I feel really lucky that I came across it at age 25 or whenever, early 20s. I don't know. I was a baby.
Mark, I'm just wondering that idea of setting the goals. Mark is a real estate lawyer. Is that something that you would recommend to people regarding that?
With respect to real
how to
estate,
buying a house, but setting. I mean, it's such an important topic, not just buying
everything. I mean, this is a topic that we could go on for hours about, especially now in the new year, right? Everybody's setting new goals, but Dawn's so right. It's, we talked about the big, hairy, audacious goal, right? The BHAG. It's way out there, your North Star. But you can say it, you could put it out there, but how do you get to it, right? And it's eating the elephant, right? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But yeah, that's their tagline: commit, then figure it out. And it's like what Dawn's saying. It's, you're not going to ride 200 miles the first time you get on your bicycle. You're going to ride 10, and then 15, then 20, then 40, then 2 days in a row of 40. And, there's a process to it, and I mean, I'm enthralled in this conversation because goal setting and the progress is so important in every aspect.
It made me think of you with the PMC.
Exactly how you keep saying, like, Don,
commit first, figure it out second.
You didn't have that follow through until you got to that point, and that's pretty cool that that had that much impact, and it seems like it continues to have impact.
Yeah, I mean, I've had so many people over the years ask me how to write a book, and I tell them, if it's nonfiction, I tell them the steps to take. And I even say, if you finish your book proposal, I will show it to my agent. And I don't think I've had even one person ever send me their book proposal. It's not glamorous, right? And so a lot of times I tell people, you have to suss out why are they wanting to write a book. A lot of the times they just need to write a book. It's more therapeutic for them. So I said, just write the book, then get it out of you and get it onto paper, and that'll be valuable to you. You're probably not going to publish it, but that's okay. That's not what you're actually needing. But even with real estate, I was interested in real estate, and real estate is always baffling to me that people, don't buy more. because it's not really that complicated. People get intimidated by it. And I think they get wrapped up in like, that's the house. It's going to be the house forever. And it's like, we had a lot of rental properties when I was married, and it was just fun. We like doing it, but you can always figure out ways, get that down payment together, do this, do that, have your rental property that is paying for itself. You go get another property, and it's not as complicated as you have in your head, but you have to sit down and like figure it out, get a spreadsheet. Spreadsheet never hurt anyone. So yeah, it's just, people there's that quote, go the extra mile. There's not many people there. Like you won't, like, it's just do the work. Then you'll be amazed what you can accomplish just by showing up every single day and not giving up when it gets boring. It's all going to get boring, right? Everything gets boring or not as exciting, but you either want to do it or you don't.
Okay. So I'm going to get bold here, if you don't mind, given what you just said and the book that you've just written. How do those things potentially connect? Was getting
big goals and divorce?
Yeah.
Maybe my divorce came from the fact that I kind of want, and I want things. I don't really settle. Like I'm always kind of, I want that the best, and that doesn't mean that everything needs to be perfect, but it also means that I'm not willing to settle for stuff that just doesn't feel okay. I don't know. I think that, we built a really big life together. We both were big dreamers, and we built 2 great careers. I think I wrote like 5 or 6 books when we were together. We bought 6 or 7 properties. We built this huge life. And I think ultimately it was covering up the fact that we weren't happy together. And so we kept piling these goals, and we'd get something and be like, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And then you have to sit and just be still and be like, I'm not actually happy just being still. And so what is life if you're not going after that next thing? You need to be able to be calm and be still and be happy and just nothing, And so when you took away all the stuff that we accomplished, all these huge goals that we accomplished together, and we did very well at that, the base of who we were together was not happy, And I think that's the ultimate goal, especially when you have kids. My ultimate goal for my kids is to provide them with a home that feels safe and happy and comfortable. And so that I'm modeling for them what home should feel like. And I think both me and my ex didn't have that great of a model growing up. And so being in an unhappy home was comfortable for us. And I really didn't want that for my kids. And that's what I was modeling for them. And so that's the biggest goal of all, right? To do better, to give your kids something better than you had, and to model for them what it's supposed to feel like when you walk in your home, and the feeling you're supposed to get in your gut instead of weariness or unease. This is safe. This is a safe, happy place. And in order to provide that for them, we had to lose them 50% of the time. We each took them into 2 separate homes so they could be in happy homes all the time. That's a big thing to get to, losing your kids half the time so that that they're happy 100% of the time.
Yeah, that's powerful. And you alluded to something about this is how you grew up. So was it comfortable or familiar?
Familiar, right? But then familiar can feel comfortable because it's just what you're used to. And so I think we both wanted to make sure that if our kids are ever in a situation like that, it feels prickly. It feels like this isn't how it's supposed to feel. Life and home is not supposed to feel like this. I need to move on. I've told that to them. I've been honest with them. They're 11 and 9. And I have this picture that I came across the other day of my face 3 years ago, and then my face now. I took this picture of myself because like a before photo for the skin cream I was going to take, because the skin cream, man, it's going to change your life, right? So I took this before photo, and I came across it because I was going through my Dropbox of photos, and I didn't even recognize myself. And it sounds so cliche to say that, but I was like, holy Jesus. My eyes were sunken. I looked like a before picture of someone who got sober. Like, I don't drink, I don't do drugs. I didn't change my diet in any way. I just left a situation that was not happy. And I showed that picture to them. I said, if anything is ever making you feel like this unhappy, move on. You don't. And I said, I stayed because I love you so much, and we were trying so much to make this family work. And then my daughter was like, yeah. And then we were in a house with two people who were fighting. And I was like, exactly. And that's not fair to you. It's not fair to us. Like, what were we doing? So I want to be honest with them about, like, there wasn't anybody at fault, there was no bad guy. We shouldn't be together. And so we're both very focused on providing for them a happy home, and we have now. They're just in two homes.
So is it kind of like a guide? Is it a guidebook to help guide somebody through, or is it simply a reflection?
It's both, I think. I think what I've done in a lot of my books is like kind of give my story as part of the story, and then I talk to other people that have been divorced, and they offer their points of view throughout. And then a lot of it is just, it's for reflection for the people who are reading it. I have a bunch of sections because I talked to all these divorced people before I started writing, because really I was just like trying to get my head on straight and trying to find a through line. My story is pretty boring compared to other stories. There's no infidelity, there's no abuse, it's just two people that just fell out of love, And so what I was trying to talk to all these different people, figure out a through line. And I would tell all of them, I'm talking to you because I'm trying to like get my head straight so I don't write a book full of chapters called F you, you effing F. Like, I can't even say all the words. It's just F-bombs everywhere. But they would all laugh and be like, I would read that book, because there's just that sentiment, right? Of like, when you're first getting at it, you're just like, F you, you effing F. So I have rage journal chapters throughout the book with that title, and they're kind of encouraging people to lean in to the rage portion of the program. There's like, write down your version of the story. I had someone tell me recently, I wrote this long letter and then I was going to give it to my ex so he would know. I'm like, oh no, don't do that. Like, it's your version. I was real caught up in that for a long time. My version and my ex's version, and how they didn't line up. And it's two different stories. Like, everybody's got their own version of the story, right? So like, write it down and leave it and keep on moving. Like, just get it out, process it, and then keep on moving. You can't carry this stuff with you because it's just pointless, So it's definitely for people in a certain period of time to acknowledge that it's crappy and it's chaotic and it's emotional, but it's temporary. It's a temporary state if you allow it to be, and keep going, keep moving through it. Get yourself some therapy, rage journal, cuss a lot. Don't cut bangs. Don't do that. And then keep it moving.
Yeah.
Don't cut bangs, Dr. Joe.
Yeah.
You either, Mark. I don't know what you'd look like with bangs. You might actually look cool with bangs.
I had them at one point in time. I had them.
Just the bangs?
Yeah,
it's a
exactly.
look.
It's a look.
Like
the look.
Like Genghis Khan, just the
right.
Oh my goodness. Good stuff.
Like a mohawk, but just on the front.
Yes. I'm in.
Hairy situation.
Yeah.
So in the book, it sounds like obviously a lot happens, but at one point there's something about alarmed therapist, that you were alarmed therapist. What was that? Caught my eye. Tell me about that.
I have a therapy chapter, and it's kind of about like when you can get therapy throughout the process. and you can get therapy like before you decide to break up, right after you break up, and then when you've been broken up for a while. And it's funny because it kind of depends on where you are in your relationship, where you actually are when you go to couples therapy. A lot of times I think you're going in and each person is hoping the therapist will take their side. It's almost like a judge situation, right? So you're hoping the therapist be like, yes, you are 100% right, and your partner is an a-hole, and that is it. Or do I need to, like, is there something I can sign? So you go in and you're just like both making your cases, and it's really not any, you're not there to actually solve anything. You're just there to have a third party to validate your yelling. And so I think we went a couple times, and the look of horror across this dude's face was like all you really needed to know about whether or not we needed to stay in therapy, one, or even together, two. Because they're just like, oh, okay, well, and you're just like, all right, I think we're going to call this. I don't think I need to spend $150 to have you basically have a look of horror across your face, because like, what are we doing? So, and then we had the same situation with a mediator who afterwards called me and was like, I'm not used to that kind of animosity. And I was like, this is literally what you do all day. You're a mediator. Like, you're not exactly like working with kindergartners here. Like, this is your job, is to work with people in hostile, like, divorce situations. And we actually were notable enough for you to be like, whoa. And that's when you're like, huh, all right, well, I think it's a good idea that we're splitting up, and let's just keep going with this. But yeah, it's, and then I say, you know, as you get on in the process, you have to get to a point where you're going to therapy to get better instead of just getting validation or blaming your ex for everything. Like, that's not work. That's just blame, and that's pointless. Like, your ex could be a complete a-hole, but you participated in this relationship, and the only thing you can really do to grow is figure out how you participated, what you allowed to happen, what you contributed, and then how you can do better moving forward. That's it. You know, like, you kind of got to leave the crap in the rear view mirror, but acknowledge what you did, or you're just going to keep doing the same stuff with the next person. You know, if it's all the other person's fault, it's not all the other person's fault. Spoiler alert, it's not.
And if it's always somebody else's fault, you're never in control. And if you're not in control, you're going to be angry, anxious, and sad all the time.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing, is that was a big thing for me getting, like, because I am such a control freak. Like, you can only, your ex is your ex for a reason, right? They're probably going to keep doing the same stuff they've always done. And when you have to co-parent with somebody that you broke up with, it's just a whole nother ball of craziness. Because, like, one of my friends said recently, her brother got divorced and had to work harder after divorce than they did when they were married, because you have to come back to this table and you have to collaborate with this person. You have to redefine your relationship, redefine your communication, and get to a place of grace with each other, or it's just not going to work. So instead of getting upset every time this person does the same crap they've been doing the whole time you've known them, you have to shift your reaction to them, right? You can't control them. You can only control your reaction to them. So that's where the peace has to come, is just not letting it affect your nervous system anymore. They're still going to get there sometimes, but that's the ultimate goal.
It sounds like the next book, Dawn. No one tells you about co-parenting.
Oh Lord, I do have a couple chapters in there. It's a wild. It's been the most humbling and difficult experience of my life. You know, divorce is like, I'm out, peace. I really thought divorce was an end point. I was so unhappy for so long. I thought it just, in my mind, was the end of the marathon, right? And then I get to the end of the marathon and they're like, oh, by the way, you get to run 4 more marathons, and like, you're exhausted emotionally, physically, in every way possible from this relationship that has just wrung you out. And then you're like, you have to start this whole nother chapter.
You're doing it with better skin, though, yeah?
You're doing it with better skin, Tom said.
Yeah, it's it was a lot of work that I think I was so exhausted from the previous years that it was not easy work. But, you know, we both love our kids more than anything on the planet. So like, they're worth it. They're worth whatever work we need to do to be two adults who are putting them first.
But you
always.
said that earlier as well, that, you know, in order to have your kids happy, they can only be with you half the time, and then with their dad. So what is that like for you?
You know, I had a therapist at the beginning who likened divorce to a grief process, because they're like, you know, you're going to grieve. And I said, well, I don't think you're understanding how excited I am to be out of this relationship. But because I had grieved the relationship years prior, you know, but the thing that I wasn't expecting was the grief I was going to feel for having lost my children. And I didn't lose them. Everybody's like, you're going to lose your kids. Well, no, I didn't, but they're gone 50% of the time. And we split during COVID. So they had literally been with me 24 hours a day. And I lost them, you know, 50% of the time. It's just, it will never be a natural state to not be with my children. That's just not the gig, right? But I'm lucky because I'm co-parenting with someone that I know they're safe and they're loved. And it's the best situation for all of us. But that was the grief process for me, was the utter shattering of my heart to not be with them. Like the first time one of them got sick and I wasn't there, it was just, and you know, we've gotten to a place that like when one of them's sick, my co-parent can come over, I can go over there. But it's not the same as like, I'm going to be with you all night because you're sick, you know, like it's just not the same to not be there, to be the one that's comforting your kid when they're sick. It's not right. It feels very, it has like empty nest vibes when you drop them off but they're way too young. It's not right. Like your brain's like, wait, this is too early. It's too early to be having empty nest vibes. I shouldn't be dropping them off and driving away.
Right.
I shouldn't be missing their life, but I am, and it's okay. I think two things can exist at the same time. Two things can be true. It's the best case scenario for our scenario, and it's freaking heartbreaking at the same time. And that's okay. You know, a lot of people stay just for the kids, and that is its own sort of heartbreak. They deserve more than to be the reason you're unhappy, you know?
It also sounds like your kids had said that as well, that, you know,
yeah. I mean, we're honest. We have good conversations about it. And I always want to be open with them. And they obviously want us all in the same house, just for convenience sake. They're like, good Lord, moving back and forth. But they see how happy I am. They see how happy my ex is. They see like, it's just a different feeling in these homes now. And they know that it's good.
So I think we've spoken quite a bit about maybe the breaking up and the falling apart. What about the putting yourself back together? Saying, as you say here, divorce isn't just a loss, but an opportunity. What do you have to say, Dawn?
I remember when we were writing the book and coming up with I knew what the title was going to be, but they sent me the subhead, and initially it was breaking up without falling apart. And I was like, that's not good, because we're going to fall apart. Like I don't want anybody to feel like they're less than because they fell apart. We're falling apart, all the way apart. Eventually you will. And if you don't allow yourself to, then it'll catch up with you, by the way. But putting yourself back together, I have a chapter in the book called New You. And it had like big time, you know, midlife crisis vibes, where I was what I was doing at the time was trying to stay busy, right? Because I'd lost my kids half the time, and I was just trying to keep it moving, stay busy, stay distracted. So I was in a big like yes phase of just, sure, yeah, we're gonna try that. Sure, I'll try that, try this, try that. Any hobby that came my way, I was trying on, and just basically just keeping myself busy. And it was a lot of fake it till you make it, because I was doing it just to keep myself busy. And then I slowly I remember it was like a year and a half. I had this moment where I could feel my nervous system finally decompress from the previous 12 years. And it was like this release of just like a breath you've been holding forever, just it's tension that you've been holding forever. And it just kind of, I was finally free of that. But, you know, I say in the chapter that it wasn't so much that I became a new me as I kind of found myself back to myself, you know, and I've evolved, but especially when you have little babies, it's just, and you have babies, you're a partner, you are building a career, all that stuff, just you can start to drown, you know. I used to always think I was treading water. I felt like I was treading water constantly, just treading water. And I think all moms feel like that to some degree. Like you're just juggling all this stuff and you're dropping like everything because you just cannot do it all. And you just feel so incompetent and inferior because you're not excelling at any of this crap you're trying to do. And I realized after I left that I wasn't treading water, I was drowning. And I was gone. I was so far gone from myself. And, you know, I kind of had to come back to life. And not everybody's in that space when they leave. Sometimes divorce is like unexpected to people. There's infidelity. There's people, it's not their choice to leave or whatever, but you can grow from it if you're willing to and not dwell in the past. There's going to be some dwelling in the past, but like eventually you're just going to get so far from it that it takes a lot of effort to reach back and pull the past into the present. And eventually it's just not even worth the effort to do that. So for me, a big thing was I started boxing. I needed to move. I needed to do something physical. I had lost a ton of weight. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. It's just, I was in a bad place. And my friend was like, you gotta move. You gotta do something. And running was okay, but it's not, I didn't really need to be in my head as much as I am when I run. I needed to just kind of not be in my head. So someone recommended boxing. So I got this little setup in my garage, and my therapist said there's actually, I don't know, like there's something in bilateral movement. She does therapy stuff with PTSD guys on their bikes. Like there's a bilateral movement thing that can kind of rewire your brain. And I was like, yeah, I think I also just really like hitting the crap out of stuff. So, I mean, sure, but we'll go with bilateral movement. Yeah, that sounds a lot better than like, I just have so much rage that I'm just like beating the crap out of this thing. But it gave me something to focus on while I was working out. I get out all this aggression and I felt so much better afterwards. And I think it kind of got me over this hump of the rage portion and they have little trackers. And now when I go against myself from 2 years ago, like different workouts that I did, I'm not getting anywhere near the punch velocity because I'm like, I just don't have the rage anymore. I still like the workout, but I'm not punching nearly as hard. And I don't know, I came back to life. And I think that, you know, it sucks to not be with your kids all the time, but if you can use that time you're not with them to really do all this, you know, via self-care that everybody's always talking about, but actually do it, you know, and whatever that looks like for you. If that looks like going out with your friends, if that looks like sitting and reading a book in silence, if that looks like, you know, punching something really hard. I don't know. Some people like to punch. Just something for you that you might have not been doing for a very long time. And you will find that you become such a better version of yourself for those children than you ever were when you were with them 100% of the time. You know, I came back to life and they can see that. You know, every once in a while had allergies and I was sitting at the table rubbing my eyes. And my kid was like, are you okay? Are you tired? And I was like, no, I just have allergies. And then I realized I used to do that all the time when I was in my marriage still. I'd just sit there and like, just at dinner, just kind of like rubbing my eyes and my head because I was just like trying to get to another place or just kind of calming myself. And that's just not our reality anymore. You know, it's a good life. And I don't know, there's a better version of yourself waiting if you just keep moving and keep going and keep believing that it's going to be okay.
And do you think, like, moving away from that idea of failure, that somehow, people who divorce, somehow they failed, as opposed to realizing the success of being able to say, this isn't right for me?
That's huge. They always say things like, why are people getting, like, when our grandparents didn't get divorced. Like, your grandparents were not happy. They were just miserable too, but they all just stuck around. Like, it's just, we are now at a point where we're evolved enough to know that it doesn't have to be unhappy. Life doesn't have to just be a slog. It doesn't mean the life's going to be like a party every day with high fives and like confetti. That's unrealistic too. But life does not need to feel like a slog. And so, yeah, I'm not big at losing, and failure is definitely a big thing you feel. It's not, for me, it wasn't so much a failure of a relationship. I felt like I failed my kids. Like, I brought them into this situation that then now they have a broken home, quote unquote, right? And that feels like a failure. But then at the same time, I think I would feel like more of a failure if I kept them in a home that, just because we're in two homes doesn't make it any more broken than when we were in one home, all dysfunctional, like, just because we're all in pictures together and smiling doesn't mean we're actually happy.
It sounds the opposite. It sounds like instead of having one broken home, you have two complete ones where your kids are happy where they are.
Yeah. And it's a different time, so it's not that big a deal these days to be divorced. I mean, it didn't have this like the stigma that it had when I was a kid, where it's like, oh, the divorce family. Like, now it's like, whatever. Yeah, you have to, and also, who cares? Like, you have to get to the point where you just can't care what anybody else thinks about your life and your happiness, because that's futile. And and you can't compare your reality to someone else's curated version of reality on Instagram or whatever. That's pointless too. I remember I'm going through photos and I found that other photo. I see all these happy, like, family photos, and almost everyone I can remember something that happened like right before or right after that was like an argument or something, like even these family vacations and that kind of stuff. And now I look at our photos and I'm like, that was it. We're just happy, we're just content. And happy is even an altered state. We're content. We're at ease. We're peaceful. We're still, and things are good.
Yeah. So with that in mind, we talk about the I am approach, the idea that we're all doing the best we can. We don't like it, we can change it. We're influenced by 4 domains: the home domain, social domain, the biological domain of your brain and body, and the I see, how I see myself, how I think other people see me. And because these 4 domains interact, the first truth of the I am, small changes can have big effects. You don't need to change everything. Dawn, given what we're talking about tonight, what small change can you recommend to our listeners?
I just spoke about all the stuff that I did, like the kind of dancing that I did after my divorce to kind of keep myself busy. One of the biggest things I did that actually helped move me into a new phase was I stopped trying to keep myself busy. Where I moved back into my house. It was our family home. It's a big house. And I'd never been in this home without the kids. And so when they weren't here, the silence was like soul crushing. It's like talking to the dog, talking to the cat. And it was really hard to be in this house without my babies. So much so that I very rarely was in this house without my babies, because I was like, I gotta get out of here. And then I was like, no, you need to sit and be still and feel all this stuff and cry about it, talk to the cat about it. And that helped me kind of move to the next stage. It was like the ultimate grief, right? Just acceptance, the acceptance instead of dancing around it and trying to avoid it. So I think the little thing you can do sometimes is nothing, is stop dancing, stop avoiding whatever it is you're trying to avoid with all this dancing. Be still, like be with your own thoughts and don't be scared of them. And it's okay if they're sad. Like it's okay if you need to cry or hit a punching bag, but just, I wasn't still. And in my partnership, that was a big thing. We just kept doing bigger and bigger stuff. We were not still people. So I think doing nothing, there's value in that.
Yeah. So be still. Good small change. The second truth of the I am. Everybody has one. Everybody has an IC domain interested in what you think or feel about them. And you know, it affects the biological domain because it feels different when you feel respected or disrespected. And you are part of someone's home and social domain. And so the second truth of the I am, you control no one, you influence everyone. You get to choose the kind of influence you want to be. Dawn Dais, what kind of influence do you want to be?
One of my favorite things that I've done in my life is I started a nonprofit, and I've always done volunteer work since I was in my 20s. And then I found that I'm really good at leading people on volunteer projects. And I started the nonprofit because a lot of people want to do good work. They just kind of need someone to show them where to go and what to do. And then it's addictive. So I always like to organize volunteer charity work because the people that it brings out are always amazing and surprising. And then I think they catch the bug and they keep doing it in their own lives. So that's the kind of influence I like to do. It's one of the things that I really enjoy. And then it's fun to see other people enjoy it as well.
Great. So I appreciate you being on the show. How do people get the book?
It's all over the place, but my website is dawndais.com. My last name is DAIS.com. And there's links there, or it's Amazon or whatever.
Super. Thank you so much for being on the show tonight. We really appreciate it. Despite all the potential beeps that we may have to do on live, it's okay.
This will be a fun one.
It'll be a fun one. Thanks so much for being here tonight, and welcome back anytime. We'll get a sense that there may be another few books in you. So bring them on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
Thank
Night,
you,
everybody. We'll see you back here next week.